All right, welcome to Peeling Syd Barrett, or welcome back anyway. This is episode 22, and in this episode, I'd like to discuss the song No Use Trying, which is the second song off of the Madcap Laughs album released in January of 1970. Now, I said before I wasn't going to do these in order. Now, I know I just did Terrapin as our first of the solo songs by Mr. Barrett. I chose to do this one next because the theme of the song seems to tie in with Terrapin itself. So before we get into it too much, let's discuss any corrections or notes that I want to make from previous episodes. And I guess the only thing that I'd like to discuss as a correction really is an oversight, which is that I didn't mention, again, that for the Terrapin piece of art that Mr. Barrett developed, that appears to tie in with the theme of the song, although they were made at different times, or who knows, maybe they were made at the same time, or at least considered at the same time. That the work of art was made when he was very young, so I'll throw up the dates on the episode screen when I put that together. But he was just a teenager when he made this. And perhaps he was considering the nature of all that symbolism at the time. Perhaps that symbolism was developing within him over time. It's hard to know exactly, but it is, again, a very, I would say, revelatory thing when you recognize the age that he's at, that he's producing these things and tying them together into his own kind of symbolism. So that's pretty much it. That's all I really wanted to call out as a correction to the previous episode. Let's go ahead and look at No Use Trying. And for this song, if you would, I'll give a version to watch, and one of them will be the lyric version of the song, so you can just kind of check out the lyrics. It's a pretty simple song, and there are a few things that I'll suggest that you pay attention to as you watch this. Now, the first one is obviously the lyrics, and the second is that you'll very early in the song you'll detect this really kind of a high-pitched wailing guitar that sounds very strange. There are different versions of this song that were recorded, and I'd like you to notice that the timing or the rhythm for the song doesn't change from version to version. He does sing it in different registers and different keys. I suppose it's different keys, maybe just different registers for his voice, but he plays it at the same rhythm constantly, and people have in the past kind of made fun of his rhythm, but I'll point out that his rhythm's pretty consistent. He's not overly slowing down or speeding up the song with these different takes. He's just trying it in different registers of voice. So if you would, go ahead and check out that song. Listen to the lyrics, try to incorporate what's being relayed, perhaps consider our discussion of the song Terrapin. Now, obviously Terrapin was chosen as the very first song on the very first album, perhaps for a very important reason. Not knowing that that's the reason why it was used at that point, but we discussed what some of the symbolism of Terrapin may have been, and I would like to point out that this song is the second song, chosen to be the second song. How much input Mr. Barrett had into which song was first, second, third, fourth, I don't know. But if he did choose this song to be second and follow up with Terrapin, and the theme of the song is consistent, you have to start to wonder if he's trying to relay a message there. So anyway, check it out, and then I guess go ahead and come on back, and we'll discuss the lyrics for the song. All right, let's go ahead then, and we'll break down the song No Use Trying, okay? Now, this song, I suppose it has some no good trying. Sorry, not no use trying. I don't know how many times I said no use trying, but it's no good trying. So it starts off with him saying it's no good trying, and he mentions that you can't put your hand where he can't see it, and that he understands that someone's different from him. And he's saying that that person can't be what they're pretending to be. and that person's rocking forward and backwards with the red and yellow mane or red and yellow hair. There's another reference to yellow hair, although in this case it's red and yellow for some reason, and a stallion horse. So there's a whole bunch there to break down. Let's try and figure out what might be involved. Okay? The first thing that I'd like to point out is that he's discussing that someone's trying to hide their hand for some reason. There's only so many reasons why someone would want to hide their hand. And obviously, it could be symbolic. A hand means different things to different people, and depending upon where it's at, it can have different symbolic meanings. But let's just consider two kind of things that can be relayed, maybe three. Okay. Some people utilize the meaning of hand as in a card game. So trying to hide your hand is like you're trying to hide what you have. It also could be because of the difference in male versus female hands. This could be another form of a sexual reference, in that a person perhaps is trying to hide their hands to disguise what their sexuality is. A third that I'd like to point out, which is consistent with the last song, Terrapin, is that a person may be trying to hide their hand because it has a ring on it. In other words, they're married. And if a person is married, but they're somehow embarrassed of being married, or perhaps they don't want this person to see that they're married, then they might hide their hands in order to disguise that fact. So there's three possibilities there. I'm sure there's more, but those are just three that come to my mind. And which one is the most likely? Well, you'll have to decide. But since the previous song was about marriage, and as we'll see in a follow-up, there are other references to the idea of relations and marriage, etc., and standard life, this may very well be a kind of a discussion on the nature of marriage. Now, one of the reasons that I'll use to back that up is that if you look up, and this is from our Dictionary of Symbols, of course, by Mr. Cirlot again, for Egyptians, the hand is a manifestation of husbandry, and this is, I don't know what page it is, 137. And then finally for Jung, Jung suggests that this may be a symbol of unconscious character in a union, affection, or of suspicion. Now that's Jung. Jung was very popular in the 60s for various reasons. He was kind of tied to a lot of the philosophers and thinkers of that time, and so I wouldn't personally be surprised if Mr. Barrett had been reading Jung. Now, I don't know that he did, but I don't know that he didn't. But if there's a reference that ties in with symbolic meaning that perhaps ties in with a theme that he's relaying in a song, that's a lot of jumps, but perhaps he was familiar with Jung. So then he mentions that the person is different from him. Again, there's, out of the three possibilities we mentioned, two of them stand out, which is one, this could be a form of a sexual thing, male-female. It could also be, of course, that someone is in a relationship. In other words, that they are married and he is not, and they're different from him because they're married. Now, that, for the time, we have to remember now, this is in a time where there were a lot of people that thought that perhaps it was better not to get married because that was a very limiting thing. Not limiting in that you can go out and have fun and do all these other things, but because the nature of what was considered to be a general social contract of ownership and direction and property was no longer needed or necessary. And so you end up with things like a woman needing a man like a fish needs a bicycle, in both directions, male and female, and that perhaps if people want to be together, they can, and if they don't want to, then they don't have to. There's a certain freedom that's tied to that And it would be very easy to project that because Mr. Barrett perhaps is stating that he is in love with someone, or that he does care about someone, that he really wanted to marry them. But I'll just point out that we don't know that that is true. He never did get married, and perhaps it may be because he didn't want to get married. So he may be of a mindset that he really enjoys being free. And there are a lot of reasons why people may or may not want to get married. And of course, some people are limited, feel that they'll be limited by it, or limited by another person. Some people feel very dedicated to other things, so they recognize that if they're going to go about what is considered to be a traditional marriage role, that if they don't or are not capable of conforming to that expectation, then they're not being honest with the other person, so they're a little hesitant to be involved in that. That goes in both directions, male and female as well. There also is the necessity to raise family if that traditional role is going to be followed of what traditional marriage was at that time. And not everybody is able to have family, and not everybody wants to have a family. So let's say perhaps that someone is infertile to some degree. They may feel that by going into a traditional marriage that they're letting the other person down, so they'd be hesitant to marry that person because they know that raising a family is important to them, but they're not capable of giving that to them. That obviously isn't as much a limiting factor now as it was perhaps back then. And I'm not saying that that's what happened here, but there are various reasons, and they're not outlined in this song, perhaps, that explain why someone would be viewing the idea of marriage differently than another person. And that if you are of the mindset that that is what this song is about marriage or a relationship of some kind, then I'm just throwing out some reasons why people may be of a mindset to avoid that. Now the next part here, he goes through rocking forward, backward, towards, and then red and yellow. We already mentioned the golden hair thing, and of course he makes the song Golden Hair later. The last bit is odd to me because he mentions that the red and yellow mane, and then he calls out a stallion horse. Now, I've noticed that stallion horse is repetitive. Okay, you don't have to say horse after a stallion. It's understood that you're talking about a horse. So I'm not entirely certain what's going on there. It's a very odd word combination, and I'd like to make note of it. And this will come up again later because there are other references to this idea. I would point out that horse is a very common slang term. You can get this from, I got it from my Dictionary of American Slang, and the sixth definition provided in there is, of course, that horse is a common slang term for heroin. And in Cockney slang, horse can be a slang term for bottle of sauce or tomato sauce, which doesn't seem to fit. So if this is a reference to perhaps the drug heroin, then the stallion portion may make sense in that line of thought, because again, you're dealing with a needle. So, and a needle is consistently a symbol that is represented as like a phallic male symbol. So perhaps that's the reason why that's being used there. I will also point out that if you're of the mindset that this is about sexuality, male-female, maybe inverting things, or perhaps this may even be a homosexual reference. It's possible. I won't say that it's not. Let's go to the next bit. He talks about it's no good trying, and he mentions holding love where he can't see it because he understands they're different from him. So Why would someone want to hold their love away? Again, if the intimation is perhaps that they hold love for him, but they're hiding it behind a form of social contract with another person, that may be related there in that song as well. The next bit is about pretending there's a caterpillar hood that covering the head, and they should be home in bed. So perhaps someone's come to visit him at night, and they should be back home in their bed. The caterpillar hood reference is interesting, again, covering the head, because, again, that could be interpreted as a phallic reference. He mentions a sequin fan. I'm not entirely certain why. And spinning around and around in a car with electric lights moving very fast. So perhaps they go on a car ride together. And if you believe that the horse reference is a heroine reference, then perhaps this is a discussion of sensations tied to taking a car ride while they're under the influence of that drug. So, a lot in there, okay? And I would say that perhaps the second two possibilities for the song are the most likely. And I would just like to point out that the idea that this is actually about marriage and relationships may be more likely when you consider the lyrics to another song called To Ramona. And this song, To Ramona, is by Mr. Bob Dylan. And it was written in, or was released in 1964, I believe. And it basically is about a woman, or this person, Ramona, that's crying, and they have a lot of sadness. And about 8 lines into the song, Bob Dylan specifically says, and there's no use in trying. And he mentions dying, and he rhymes that, etc. So we know that Mr. Barrett went to see Bob Dylan. We've mentioned that before. We also know that he did Bob Dylan Blues, which is a song. A lot of people, like John Lennon, are on the record for saying they were very greatly influenced by Bob Dylan. The extent to which Mr. Barrett was influenced by Bob Dylan is unknowable. But this song, if you look through the entirety of the lyrics, you'll see that he's kind of discussing that she perhaps has perceptions of how the world should be versus what it's really like, and that it's all kind of just a game, etc. And in one line, he mentions a meaningless ring. And perhaps that finalizes the discussion, if Mr. Barrett was pointing to that song, To Ramona, that he may be relaying the idea that the ring itself is meaningless, and that perhaps all that matters is a greater sensation of love and caring for one another, which is, of course, an argument against a fixed social contract of marriage, right or wrong, depending upon your point of view. So that's a lot of possibilities for ways to interpret the meaning of that song, and I guess that's pretty much it. I think that what I'd like to do next is kind of talk about what I want to do in the future, and I've mentioned this before, and I've been thinking about it for a while. So, what I think I'd like to do is I plan to continue with this, and we'll go through art and songs made by Mr. Barrett, of course, which are part of his solo career. There's only so many more of them that I plan to go into, and there's only so many of them that are worth going into. But the other thing that I would like to do is to make a series of sorts about influences of, or by, or on Mr. Barrett. I don't know if I'll do Bob Dylan, etc., but I'll do some things. So, to start this off, of course, we've been making a kind of a note of things or influences that were impactful on Mr. Barrett and what his tendencies are with music and also poetically. So let's just go back over that list really quick, okay? And first off, we'll discuss the themes, one of which is childhood. He mentions male-female inversions, sexual metaphors and innuendos. Oh, the male-female thing is by 6. Sexual metaphor innuendos by 2. King, queens, and royals by 6. I'm going to add Jungian / animal metaphors by 3. Dismissive, misogynistic by 4. Torn attraction and lost love, relationships by 6. Changing religious or esoteric beliefs by 6. Alienation, separation by 3. Drug or psychedelic references by 7. Colors and paint by 7. Flying by 4. Hidden sorrow by 4. Sun, stars, planets by 6. Low-high art combinations or pieces of art tied into what he's doing by 3. Shakespeare token references by 6. Extensive planning by 2. Science, etc. by 2. And specific word combinations would be colors, mirrors, screaming, sunshine, moonshine, cats as related to people, sorrow and then tomorrow, gown and ground, river forever, rhyme slang, which we've mentioned numerous times, a stairway to the heavens, the misty riders, the traveling by telephone, dressed in red, and I'll perhaps add one more in there. The last thing is the music style, which we've noted before, the odd lyrical rhythm, discordant high harmony, the 2-note slide, rising descending steps, and then mechanical noises or noises in general. So let's go ahead then and consider a song that we skipped. And I skipped it for a reason. Let's go back to it now. And that song is called Paintbox. All right, so what I plan to do, I'm going to break it down now. I'm going to show you how I want to do this. And what I want to do is take a song. Now this song is credited to Mr. Rick Wright as written by Rick Wright. I'm going to give you a lyric version of the song. I want you to listen to it, or you can just pull up the lyrics on your phone. Check it out, and then I want to point out some things. Let's see if we can find possible influences into this song. Now, supposedly Mr. Barrett didn't have anything to do with this song. He may have participated in it in a bit. It was released in, let's see, October of 67 when he was still with the band. Released in November 67, recorded in October of 67. And this was before Mr. Barrett left the band, and it was before Mr. Gilmore was working with the band. So the things that we note in here are tied almost entirely to the original members of the band. So go ahead and check those out, and then we'll come back, and I want to discuss a few things. Okay? All right. So hopefully you had a chance to check out that song, Paintbox, and I want to point out a few things. All right. First is the title, Paintbox. Let me ask a simple question. Why is Rick Wright making a song about painting? Perhaps he was a painter, perhaps he wasn't. I don't know. Nothing to my knowledge indicates that he was a painter. But this is a song about, it's called Paintbox. Is there something in this song related to painting? I don't know. I don't really see it. So I have to wonder, where did this title come from? I know that Roger Barrett was a painter. So I'm going to give that a point. We're going to add up these points as we go. I'm just going to find correlations. I'm going to total the correlations, and then we'll give it a Syd score. Okay? So that's 1 point right there. Now, also, during the course of this song, there's a descending kind of a bridge, a descending chord progression, which is something that we've noted before that Syd likes to do. It has an odd rhythm to it, so I'm going to give that a 2. Now, there is a line that has very long vowel clanging. And that is the, I believe, the 4th verse where he says, out of the front door I go, and then they draw out, traffic's moving rather slow. that is a clanging on the long O sound, which again is something that Mr. Barrett likes to do, and it has distorted time feel to it. So I'm going to give that 2 points. So now we're up to 4 points. Now, the last thing that I'll mention is that it has something to do with relation between this person and a girl. I suppose it's a love interest. And they want to go out, and she doesn't really want to go, but she goes, and then she's really cross with him, etc. So there's a bit of a relationship drama going on there, so I'm going to give that a 5. These are all things that Syd Barrett has previously done. So this song, Paintbox, I can find 5 correlations to it. The only thing that I see in this song that I don't really like, I'm going to deduct a point, is that it doesn't have any really interesting word combinations to it other than that clanging long O sound. I don't see any invented words really. Be a bee, a bee, a bee, a bee, for cross as she can be, and far away, 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 drink a drink, a drink. I don't, that's just really, I don't know. It's not interesting to me at all. So, I don't correlate that to anything that Mr. Barrett has done. I don't see any really genius combinations of poetry here. So I'm going to deduct a point for that. So my final Syd score for this song is a 4. Meaning it perhaps was influenced by 4. However many you want to make 4. 4 out of 10, I don't know. But I give it a 4. And I'll do this with other songs, Moving Ahead and other things. I'm going to give them a Syd score, which will indicate, I guess, in a form of detached way, an objective way, how much the song perhaps was influenced by Mr. Barrett. And if you're of the mindset, as we mentioned in the breakdown on the previous episode about chapter 24, that perhaps Mr. Barrett was still working with people, that perhaps he was helping put together some of these songs, and perhaps he was kept on to do that, then we can get a feel for songs that maybe Syd may have had his hand in moving ahead. And, of course, we wouldn't know something like that. There is something else I'd like to point out about this song, and that is that it has a form of the down-tuned guitar with it. It uses an E minor add 9 chord and a C major chord. And I don't really want to get in, I believe C major 7. So I don't really want to get into the chords too much with the songs because I'm still learning a lot of that. And I don't feel overly comfortable discussing them much. And I also, I'm kind of overwhelmed with details already. So going into a lot of details about chords that are used, I don't feel is very conducive to what I'm trying to attain. I will just point out that this E minor add 9 was added in this song. And that chord is utilized moving forward quite a bit. And this chord was added before Gilmore jumped into the band. Just to point that out. Okay? So that's pretty much it. That's about all I wanted to mention with this, other than the idea of utilizing down-tuned guitars, and I suppose the D major 9 tuning is kind of what is called out. You can get all this information in Wikipedia, and I'll call out the articles that they cite as relaying this information. I'm not going to pretend that I totally understand the tuning. I understand the chords, E minor add 9, I kind of get, but the rest of it is kind of a little bit beyond me. They do, within the Wikipedia article on this specific song, break down the follow-up songs that use the same chord. Okay? So if you are interested in that and you want to check it out, you can find out how far along it goes. And those songs run all the way up into the wall. If you have an eye for detail, all the way up through the wall. Okay? So, I guess that's pretty much it. That's what I wanted to outline. That's what I hope to do in the future. I'm going to ask questions about Syd and his influence. Did he work with certain bands? Did he work with certain songs moving into the future? And, let's discuss really quick what some of the reasons are why he may have been doing that, why he may have wanted to hide something like that. We know that there's about 12 years of his life that's missing, living in various hotels, and of course, the pop history is that he just kind of disappeared and was hiding out and became some form of, I guess, a maniac slash drug addict or whatever people want to believe. I've already kind of laid out the idea that his father was kind of a workaholic. He was a very type A kind of a person, very dedicated. And if Mr. Barrett was that way, and there are some indicators that he may have been, then he may have continued to work on his own. And that's what I'm going to try and figure out is perhaps was he working on other things during those 12 years, etc.? Did he want to hide all of that? Why would he want to hide all of that? And of course, as we mentioned before, a person that's under contract to produce work isn't simply just let out of a contract. Certainly they're not given royalties for the next 20, 30 years for music if they're opting out of a contract. So anyway, that's what that part's going to be about. Now, the last thing that I'd kind of like to discuss, again, I'm going to do one more poem by Mr. Baudelaire, and this is from Fleurs again, as I did last time. Again, it ties in to some degree with these past two songs. Tout entier, I believe is how it's pronounced. And I'll just go ahead and read it, and I'll give you the words as I run through it. The devil to my chamber high this morning came to visit me, and setting his temptation sly, inquired, I would know, prithee, among the beauties that compose the subtle magic of her sway, among the bits of blackened rose that form her lovely body, say, which is the sweetest? O my soul, to the abhorred thou didst reply, naught can be chosen from the whole, for every part is melody. When all to me is ravishing, how can I say which bound me tight, dazzling as dawn? Her eyes can bring the consolations of the night. Too exquisite the harmonies that all her body fair affords, for impotence to analyze and note its several rhythmic chords. O mystic metamorphosis of all my senses blent in one! Her breath the divinest music is, her voice a perfume's benison. So, in that poem, Mr. Baudelaire is relaying the idea of something that is enrapturing about a love interest that perhaps can't entirely be captured in a single idea or a single thing. It's, I guess you would say it's the romantic ideal of love. And it's relayed there. I don't know that these last two songs deal with the idea of a romantic ideal of love or a muse, perhaps, for Mr. Barrett. But perhaps that is being relayed, and I would just give that poem as consideration of the idea of a muse, and that a dedication to love perhaps does not necessarily tie in with the idea of marriage in all people's minds. It is perhaps a logical progression to standard thought, but not everyone thinks that way. One last thing that I would like to point out, and I did mention a long time ago that one of my primary influences was Mr. Viktor Frankl and his book, Man's Search for Meaning. Now, obviously this would be humanity's search for meaning in many ways. He's not simply trying to say that this is about men. He's talking about mankind. So please don't take it to mean that he's just talking about men. But there are very important things in this book, and this book was a big change in my mind because at certain points in time in my life, I was a very angry young man. Let's just put it like that. Okay? So, learning about Mr. Frankl and everything he went through, and realizing that this man had struggled with all the things that he struggled with, and still became a better person and gave such beautiful thoughts to the world in spite of his own difficulties. For me, it really kind of made me realize that I couldn't be I couldn't allow negative events in my life to change me for the worse. This man, Mr. Frankl, lost his family, all murdered by the Nazis. He led a horrible life. He became very philosophical about it. He lost his life's work, his entire life's work, and had to rework it. And I have to admit that if I was him, I wonder if I would be strong enough to do that. I think I would have become a very bitter man, and I would have hated the world. But he did not. In spite of his experiences, he put together this, and you have to wonder if it's because, obviously, there's a bit of it that perhaps is tied to him, so perhaps he's trying to give himself meaning, that his life's work is his meaning. But I do wonder if there isn't a part of him that didn't realize on some level that he was making the world a better place with his own suffering and interpreting that for other people. So, again, if you haven't read this book, I do very much recommend it. It had a very large impact on me. And I'll just relay a few stories in here, okay? Now, what version? I don't know what version I have here. Let me look real quick. Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. It's an introduction to logotherapy, Beacon Press, Boston. And I believe this is a 1992 version. So, I'm on page 75. On page 75, now, if you're not familiar with this book at all, I'm not going to tell you too much about it, okay? I just want to relay the fact that the first part of the book is about his struggle in an extermination camp and losing everything and all of his experiences there. And the second part of the book is his discussion of the development of logotherapy, or kind of his form of psychology, which basically boiled down to the idea of trying to help people realize what the meaning to their life was. Okay? So on page 75, he discusses the nature of making choices every day. That every day and every hour people make choices. And if they will or will not submit to various influences and powers that are going to destroy your inner freedom. And whether or not people are going to become playthings of circumstance and lose their freedom. That's a very deep idea, that every day and every hour people are making very small decisions, and sometimes very large decisions, that impact their own inner freedom. And I would say now in the modern world that people don't consider that at all in their in their interactions with one another, and perhaps in the choices they make about what they choose to consume, etc. The next thing I'd like to relay is on page 76. He mentions that what the difference between an active and a passive life is. So a person that lives an active life is able to realize value in creative work, whereas a passive person can obtain some fulfillment in experiencing beauty, art, and nature. Okay. He also goes on to the idea that some people don't have the ability to do either one of those. They don't have the ability to really create the things that they want to, and they don't really have the ability to just kind of passively ride through life and experience the things that they want to. Some people have that stolen from them and are subject to a life of suffering. And that suffering and death are integral to the human experience and integral to the idea of understanding meaning and life. And of course, there are people that will argue that the whole point of various religions is to avoid struggle and pain. He seems to be arguing the opposite here, that it's actually integral, and that all those aspects tie into how a person can attain a greater capacity to understand the meaningfulness of their own life. He mentions on page 78 meeting with a woman, and she mentions that there's a tree outside of her window that's her only friend in all of her loneliness. which is a painful thing to read. And I have to point out that it is similar to the Diary of Anne Frank. And she mentions talking with the tree, and he thought perhaps she was a little bit nutty. And one day he asked her if the tree ever talked back to her. And she answered with the idea that, or the statement that the tree answered, that it said to me, I am here, I am life, eternal life. And in that way, perhaps, relayed the concept of the value of life. I'll give one last idea. On page 98, he discusses how people that perhaps had been done wrong to would perhaps be convinced to let it go and strive to come back to a truth about how a person doesn't have the right to do bad things to other people just because they've experienced bad things, and that perhaps if a person was able to understand the value in their own suffering, that they would be able to overcome it and live a more meaningful life, and the importance of that. And also, I think that's quite important. Now, again, I just read some Baudelaire and Mr. Frankl. I think they fit the feel in general. I wonder if that mindset was perhaps going on inside of Mr. Barrett's head. There's no way of knowing that, of course, and I'm totally adding in Viktor Frankl on my own, as well as Baudelaire. As we mentioned, Mr. Morrison, I know, like Baudelaire. I have no idea if Mr. Barrett did. But the idea of dedication to a muse or love is contained within Baudelaire's poem. Perhaps that's what's being relayed in these two songs, Terrapin and No Use Trying. And finally, a lot of people feel a certain sadness for Mr. Barrett's life, and perhaps listening to these songs, assuming that he's actually even trying to relay a personal experience. Of course, if you relay personal experiences, you can write a song every day. You can go out, walk outside, write down whatever you see. If you're of that mindset and capability, so long as you're true to your experience, it's very easy to be creative. You can do it all the time, if that's what he's doing. Now, if he's just making up stories, which is definitely possible, if he's tying in other people's stories or taking ideas from other folks, which we know he did to some degree, and he's putting these together, then that doesn't apply. But if he is relaying personal experience here, and perhaps he was able to define his own meaning, the meaning to his life and the meaning to his suffering, and he was able to use that to try and make the world a better place, to decorate the world, to beautify the world, to beautify himself. He may have been doing that with music and with his art, or that may have been a part of what he was doing, particularly during, like we said, those 10 to 12 years where he was just kind of gone. At any rate, that's pretty much all I wanted to cover. So I think my next episode, I'm going to discuss the More album. Or perhaps we'll discuss something else. And as a kind of a lead-in or a teaser for that something else, which I plan to go into here eventually, I'm going to give you two images. One is a portion of the More album with an interesting, contrasting photo development with color of a windmill, which is interesting to me for various reasons. And I'll also give a photograph of a portion of Pink Floyd's Belgian version of the Scarecrow. And in this version, I'd like you to note that apparently Roger Waters was making that tick-tick noise for the song by banging a violin bow or a cello bow on his bass guitar. and I think you've seen something like this before. So I'll just leave that as a little bit of a teaser. Please remember to give a share and a like, and perhaps if you haven't subscribed already, consider subscribing. It all helps out with the algorithm, and hopefully, this will develop over time. I was happy that there were no issues with the last episode where I kind of sang Terrapin, and perhaps that isn't as big an issue as I thought it was. I still kind of like setting up the episodes like this. A lot of folks really jazz up with ridiculous photos and stuff, and it's really sad because I think people that buy into the pop history of these things. I was just watching somebody did some episode about how Jimmy Page may have made a deal with the devil to get all these, I don't even know. It's just really absurd. It's really weird. And there are a lot of people that push this strange stuff that's, if they want to give opinion, that's fine, but I really wish they would kind of look at it from a whole bunch of different angles and then just kind of throw information into there and let people decide on their own, like we did with this song, No Use Trying. So that's it for today. Hopefully you enjoyed the episode, and I'll talk to you later.